Come see us on tour in Los Angeles, Honolulu, Dallas, Texas, Baltimore, Atlantic City, Cohoes, New York, and Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets, and only there.
You might remember in the halcyon days of last week, we were hearing quite a lot about Doge, Vivek, and Musk running into trouble with the MAGA base over the H-1B work visas. Elon was tweeting up a storm about these visas. The reason I'm in America, along with so many critical people who built SpaceX, Tesla, and hundreds of other companies that made America strong, is because of H-1B. Take a big step back and fuck yourself in the face. I will go. Who knew he was a Tropic Thunder fan? I will go to war on this issue, the likes of which you cannot possibly comprehend. Wow. He felt really strongly about this. And then, he was getting so much pushback, he felt like he had to clarify. He says, maybe this is a helpful clarification. I'm referring to bringing in, via legal immigrations, the top 0.1% of engineering talent as being essential for America to keep winning. Don't forget, plebs, when America wins, you win.
That's right.
That's what he's thinking of. He's thinking of you. Even Jack Posobiec wasn't buying that. That's 01 visa program. H-1B is a different program. The 01 is for geniuses, for really exceptional. Einstein wants to immigrate. That's what that's for.
For the president of Ghana.
For the president of Ghana when they want to come help us with our fire management.
Right.
So then Elon, wow, he calls out his critics as racist. He goes woke. This very woke argument he makes. The contemptible fools I'm referring to are those in the Republican Party who are hateful, unrepentant racists.
Contemptible fools. Does that sound like a deplorable to you?
Sounds kind of like a deplorable. Racist.
Sounds deplorable.
You're all racists. Yeah. They will absolutely be the downfall of the Republican Party if they're not removed. So you got it. You got it. If you have an issue with these H-1B visas, which, as we showed in our own segment, were being used for such things as Chippendales dancers, and the funniest one was professor of African American music. If there's anything you would think we could supply domestically, it would be that, but apparently not. But hey, all of a sudden, Elon has a new fixation. This is what they call in the business a conversation changer.
Right.
Please call your member of parliament and tell them that the hundreds of thousands of little girls in Britain who were and still are being systematically, horrifically, I'm going to say assaulted, deserve some justice in this world. This is vitally important, or it will just keep happening. Well, that's quite a heel turn. All of a sudden, Elon is tweeting about a 10-year-old grooming gang scandal from England, and I'm not in any way trying to minimize the scandal. It just seems very peculiar that right when the MAGA base was really giving Elon a hard time on calling them all racists for questioning his desire to bring in cheap labor via the H-1B program, they suddenly became fixated on helping children, particularly given that I've never known Elon to particularly care about children. Here he is with child murderer and war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu, who you could see here, the military actions that he's been taking, has a nearly 70% women and children casualty rate in Gaza. And Elon does not look perturbed. Looks like he's having a great time. Looks like he's having a great time there with Benji. His buddy Benji.
Yeah, by far the largest cohort by deaths in Gaza are 14 years and under.
Yeah, so it's pretty funny that all of a sudden he cares about these children, rightly so. I mean, it's a legitimate thing to care about, but it's just a little strange given that not only doesn't he seem to care about the children that the guy he's yucking it up with here is murdering, he seems more than willing to help him in that effort for his own interests. Isn't that funny how that works? So what is going on with this? So I looked at a lot of different sources. Euronews summed it up pretty well. Why all of a sudden this is exploding in your face this week. Elon Musk has reignited a political debate in the UK around the crimes of gangs of men who systematically groomed and assaulted children in English towns over several decades. In a flurry of posts on his social platform X, the billionaire has taken aim at senior UK Labour figures, claiming Prime Minister Keir Starmer was deeply complicit in the mass assaults in exchange for votes.
See, this is related to the Facebook story. See, if you say that word too many times, they will demonetize the video. So that means you have to work for free. So if you have a news and politics podcast that you make a living doing, you have to hope the news is bright and sunny every day. Because if the news is controversial, you have to cover it for free. Then you have to work for free, right?
Exactly. Which, I mean, this could be demonetized anyway because of the subject. I'm doing my best to avoid using certain words. You can see them on the screen.
Working the odds. We're trying to work the
everyone
odds.
knows what we're talking about. He also called safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips a fill-in genocide apologist and called for her to be imprisoned. Musk's latest incursion into British political life has sparked outrage among Labour figures, with the Prime Minister condemning, quote, those that are spreading lies and misinformation, adding that they are not interested in victims but in themselves. It follows Musk's unexpected call for his close ally Nigel Farage to step down as the leader of the far-right Reform UK party and his endorsement of activist Tommy Robinson, who is serving a prison sentence for contempt of court. Okay, so folks, this is why we used to tax the rich at a 90% rate. It wasn't simply to fund the government. In fact, it wasn't even principally to fund the government. It was principally because when you allow wealth to accumulate to this level, you wind up with a figure like Musk who can not only control the domestic politics in the country that he lives in, he has so much money, he can start interfering in politics in countries all over the world. Is that really what you want? Is that what you want? Because at that point, you are a peasant. You are a peasant. This is a royal. And the royal, you're aligning yourself with a royal that you think represents your interests, but you have no say over what he does. You're just clinging on to his ermine cloak, saying, oh, this is my billionaire. Oh, look at how cool my billionaire is. Does this look healthy to you? Do you feel like you're empowered by this? The so-called grooming gang scandal relates to a series of high-profile cases which found that gangs of men, mainly of Pakistani descent, had groomed, drugged, and assaulted girls from a disadvantaged background in English towns between the 1980s and the early 2010s. The most known cases occurred in the northern English towns of Rotherham, Rochdale, and Oldham. A report by Professor Alexis J. in 2014 estimated that some 1,400 children were sexually exploited in Rotherham between 1997 and 2013, predominantly by men of Pakistani descent. That report identifies failings by authorities and the police, and also cites local authority officials describing their nervousness at identifying the ethnic origins of perpetrators for fear of being thought racist. So I don't want to spend too much time. I want to keep this moving. But I just want to point out here, in 2014, they put out a report about this, and they did not cover up the fact that there was a certain element of political correctness in the way that the authorities handled it, that they didn't, because I've read a fair amount about this over the years. And, the framing is usually that this is repressed, and I'm sure it is by a lot of labor politicians and that kind of thing. But this is all flared up around whether they should do another report. And I just want to point out, they did do a report, and there's a second report, which we'll get to, and it doesn't not address that. It didn't pretend that that was not an element in how horribly mishandled this clearly was. Do you want to say anything before I go on?
No. Go ahead.
In 2016, Jay became chair of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse and concluded in a 2022 report that such abuse by organized groups was endemic across England and Wales. The report sets out 20 recommended actions which are yet to be implemented. Now, maybe I'm not an expert in England, but who's been running England since this report came out, 2022? Until a few months ago, that was the Tories, right?
That's
the
right.
Conservatives running it. So the report set out 20 recommended actions that are yet to be implemented. So until a few months ago, the people who would have implemented this would have been the Tories, who are claiming that the responsibility for this entirely rests with the Labour Party, even though the Labour Party has not been in power for a very long time, for any length of time. Musk has waded into the debate after it emerged that the safeguarding minister, Jess Phillips, rejected a request for a government-led inquiry into such cases in the town of Oldham, arguing the local council should decide to commission an inquiry instead. Professor Jay and the ex-chief prosecutor responsible for prosecuting the Rotherham perpetrators, Nazir Afzal, have since rejected calls for a fresh inquiry, saying previous recommendations need to be acted upon. Victims want action rather than another national inquiry, Jay told the BBC. Opposition figures, including Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch, have echoed Musk's calls for a national inquiry. Labor figures have pointed to the fact that none of the recommendations made in Professor Jay's previous inquiry were implemented by consecutive Conservative governments. Now, I'm sorry, we're not Keir Starmer fans. He seems like a horrible, horrible excuse for a person and a politician. Nonetheless, I have to ask, if the issue is helping and seeing to it things like this don't happen in the future, why would the outrage not be focused on the fact that these 20 recommendations have not been implemented? Like, why would you be trying to direct the energy towards a lengthy process of inquiry when 2 inquiries have been done? Like, maybe if you conclude another inquiry is required, okay, well, implement the 20 things. Like, isn't that the cart before the horse to do a third inquiry? Like,
right.
Shouldn't... Musk has also claimed hundreds of thousands of girls were mercilessly targeted. Although it is unclear how many victims were targeted by the gangs, more than 7,000 victims and survivors gave evidence to the independent inquiry into child abuse that terminated in 2022, and a special task force set up in 2023 has provided support to some 4,000 victims. Between 2008 and 2013, the Prime Minister served as the head of the Crown Prosecution Services, CPS, which oversees criminal prosecutions in England and Wales. 9 months after his appointment, the CPS decided not to prosecute alleged members of a grooming gang in Rochdale after lawyers advised the main victim was unreliable. That decision was then overturned by Nazir Afzal after he was named chief prosecutor for the northwest of England 2 years later in 2011. Afzal's efforts saw 9 men convicted in Rochdale. While the CPS was criticized for their initial inability to prosecute, Starmer has never been accused of any responsibility, and Afzal has commended him for his support in bringing perpetrators to account. Afzal is reported to have previously said, quote, Keir was 100% behind the decision to publicly admit that we had got it wrong in the past. Keir left in 2013, the CPS having gone from being dire at doing sex abuse cases to having the highest conviction rate in our history. Afzal also said, according to reporting by The Guardian and the Financial Times, as I said, I read 5 articles about this, that seems to check out. That all seems to check out in everything that I've looked at. Even the clip that I will show of his main interrogator here from the Conservative Party, she seems to concede that point. Starmer has defended his record by pointing out that he reopened child abuse cases that had been closed, brought the first ever prosecution of a grooming gang, and changed CPS guidance to facilitate prosecution. Professor Jay's 2014 report on the Rotherham case points out that in October 2013, Starmer revised the CPS guidance on child sexual exploitation to set out a clear, agreed approach which prosecutors would take to tackle cases of child sexual abuse. This included a decision to remove behaviors thought to undermine the reliability of young victims and previously used to block prosecution, including the way they dressed or acted, whether they used alcohol or drugs, and whether they immediately complained. Now, I must say, from my knowledge of, from my knowledge of the culture in Europe, if you listen to a lot of this, it seems like they it seems like they took longer to get to not blaming victims, and they also seem to have a very different culture around what constitutes an age of consent than we do. Because when you look at the conversation that they're describing, it's a conversation we really had back in the 80s and 90s. We went through our own period where these kinds of cases of predation, sexual predation on children, were really repressed, and the perpetrators were protected, and the victims were silenced. It sounds like England went through that much later than we did. Now, also looking around at it, yeah, these are horrific, almost unimaginably horrific crimes. It sounds like a lot of people have not faced full accountability for their liability and not properly investigating it, in covering it up, in not prosecuting the perpetrators to the fullest extent of the law. That all seems to be true, but that doesn't seem to be what any of this is about, particularly given that the accusers, the people who are really instigating this, have a great incentive to push this to the front, and in the case of the Conservative Party, to avoid responsibility for their own neglect. So this was just today, Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch clash over a national inquiry. So this is a clip of her comments.
About the Prime Minister's work in the CPS.
All right, so she herself says this is not about his work. So the fact that she doesn't want to focus on his work tells me that his lack of responsibility is probably valid.
This is not about the Prime Minister's work in the CPS. And I would say very respectfully to the Prime Minister, it's not about you. It is about the victims. Be a leader, not a lawyer. We know that people were scared to tell the truth because they thought they would be called racist. If we want to stop this from ever happening again, we cannot be afraid. The Labour Party has adopted the APPG definition of Islamophobia. That same APPG report said talking about sex groomers was an example of Islamophobia. This is exactly why people are scared to tell the truth. And the lack of clarity means that innocent British Muslims are smeared by association. That is not fair, and only a national inquiry can solve this. So will the Prime Minister look again at the Labour Party's adoption of the definition of Islamophobia, its chilling effect, and rule out introducing it in government?
All right, so this is where the neoliberals kind of dig their own hole with their love of Orwellian language manipulation and policing. But she's conflating two things. Yes, it's valid to point out if this is indeed true, and knowing liberals, I don't doubt that it is, that they suppress discussion of Asian sex grooming gangs as racist. And she's saying that's why we need a national inquiry. Now, the one does not track with the other. Now, Starmer's response here, which we're going to show, that these same people didn't do anything about this when they were in power seems pretty accurate.
Mr. Speaker, this is one of the worst scandals in recent British history. But how are they going to explain to their constituents that obeying his whip is more important than doing the right thing?
She's right to say it's one of the worst scandals. It's terrible. That's why I acted on it. Her recently acquired view that it's a scandal, having spent a lot of time on social media over Christmas, not once in 8 years did she stand here and say what she's just said. Not once in 8 years. They didn't act on the recommendations. They want a national inquiry. We had a national inquiry, the J inquiry, the J report. 20 recommendations, not a single one implemented. Not a single one implemented. And she said, you can do two things at once. You can't kill the bill this afternoon, wreck that bill, and protect children. There was Mr. Speaker, there was a dreadful case of Sarah Sharif that everybody will remember. This was the girl taken out of school and abused by an abuser. The bill this afternoon fixes that gap. And I know, I'm looking across, I know there are honourable members on the benches opposite who know very well that what's in this bill is necessary, that it's the right thing to do, and that would want to vote for this bill. I urge them to think twice about following this short-sighted, misguided, bandwagon-jumping approach of the non-leadership of the Leader of the Opposition. I urge them to.
I love the House of Commons. It's like Jerry Springer meets Downton Abbey.
All right,
so what? Do it.
All right, so what is he talking about? All right, so the bill they want to pass is the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill. It includes measures to protect vulnerable children, such as tougher rules around homeschooling and support for those in care, inspections of schools, changes to academies, and regulation of private education institutions. The Conservatives are bringing forward an amendment to the bill to call for ministers to establish a national statutory inquiry into historical child sexual exploitation focused on grooming gangs. While the proposed amendment would stop the children's bill in its tracks if it were passed, it is not expected to pass because of the Labour government's large majority. Okay, so what this looks like, and we get this a lot here, where they introduce amendments because A, they don't want the other party to get credit for a good bill passing, and B, they're trying to embarrass the other party by forcing them to vote against something that they've been able to frame in a certain way. If this was really about the children, again, why is the outrage not about the fact that the 20 recommendations have not been implemented, and they have not been implemented under what? The Conservative government that is now making these accusations and trying to ask for another inquiry when they didn't follow the recommendations of the first inquiry. And you want to see how much this is self-interested on both Elon's and the Tories' part. Here's Liz Truss. We will not rest until those responsible are brought to account. Alison Pearson lays bare the snobbery, the complicity, and the amorality of the British establishment, of which I am a part. Elon Musk is right to take them on. And to their credit, a lot of people took her on.
Well, hey, she saw an opportunity to become relevant again. I mean, if I had turned in her tenure as prime minister, I'd be sticking to the, watercolor paintings. I'd be like George Bush. Like,
right.
Just take up a hobby.
This is my painting. I call it Tower on Fire.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so this is her chance. Tag Elon, hope for the best.
While I am glad to see higher profile politicians starting to speak up, I feel I must ask, why are you speaking up now? You were elected in 2010, serving under Cameron, May, Johnson, and Sunak, as well as holding the position of PM yourself. Why, after 14 years, have you decided now to speak up about a crime, a highly organized crime that has been going on for decades?
If she were smart, she would reply to him, "Why don't you take a step back and fuck your face?
Fuck your face.
I'll talk about this if I want because it's an important issue." Then she'll be rehabilitated.
Here we see some more comments. Remember, you served in governments overseeing this debacle. And oh, yes, you were prime minister. The conservatives had their chance to do something about this menace and completely squandered it away. So all of your talk now is meaningless and bad politics. Here's another. You had 14 years in power. Yes, the conservatives were in power throughout the entire length of this scandal. From the scandal breaking through both reports, they did nothing about it. Now, this is going around a lot. I think this is terrible. Yeah, so this is somebody who was prosecuted, and now he's out delivering food. I don't know if it's now, actually, because they're spreading this article around. It goes back to 2021. But yeah, that's terrible that a guy who was convicted of child grooming is then let back to the same town, even though he was under a deportation order because his lawyers were tying it up in the court. Yeah, sure.
I mean, this is why we have contactless delivery, to be fair.
That is why. Who was in power in 2021? The conservatives. So why did they do something? Why are they spreading this around now as if this is that? And again, we're not fans of Keir Starmer, but I mean, bullshit is bullshit. And this is just obvious, just naked political hypocrisy from both Elon and from the opposition party in England. So now somebody else we're not a fan of, but stopped clock twice a day and all that. Batya Unger Sargon went on Piers Morgan, who's also been piping up about this. Riley Gaines is a very sad case, man. I'm sorry a dude swam against you, but shut the fuck up. That doesn't qualify you to speak on these kinds of subjects. So this is what she had to say, and she gets it all right.
It's very important that we ask, why are Americans talking about this 10-year-old case all of a sudden with so much vigor and so much interest? And the answer is because, as you led with, Piers, Elon Musk decided that this was going to be his cause du jour. And the reason decided that, it seems to me, is to distract from the massive debate that he launched about H-1B visas when he sided with foreign workers over American workers, and the fact that in response to criticism, he has begun censoring people on Twitter in exactly the same way that conservatives used to be censored on Twitter under the old regime. And in order to change the subject, he has decided to talk about this decade-old case in Britain and take up this character. And you are right, you are both right, it's not Islamophobic for people in England to debate this. But you know what I will not stand for? What will make somebody my enemy is if people in America decide to talk about our Muslim neighbors and friends and co-Americans who have nothing to do with this, and because a billionaire is throwing a tantrum and trying to change the subject, will suddenly start talking about people in a totally different country in a way that makes my neighbors feel uncomfortable, my neighbors feel unsafe in America. And I think that's a really important point to make. Yep.
I care very much about Muslims as long as they are not anywhere near Israel.
Right, yeah.
If they happen to neighbor Israel, slaughter away, bombs away, folks. So, yeah, she's an asshole, but she's right about that. She hits that right on the head. I mean, has there ever been a more transparent attempt to change the conversation than Elon all of a sudden directing? Oh, yeah, no, the bad immigrants, the bad. See, I'm with you guys. I was with you guys the whole time. Just amazing, and just so transparent. And you know what? I feel terrible for these victims in England because it doesn't seem like anybody really cares about them and all this. Everybody's just using them for political advantage.
Yeah, well, I mean, you talk about a nightmare blunt rotation. That is one panel he's got going there. Piers, Jenky, Batya Unger Sargon, Riley Gaines, and then I forget who the other guy is. I think he's a prick too, but I forget what the name is on the end.
It's just so sad. It's just so sad. Like we did segments supportive of Riley Gaines on our own show. I saw Chloe Cole tweeting out this pro-Zionist shit. Come on, man. It's so sad the way these people they had what was done to Chloe Cole, where she was, transitioned at a very young age. Yeah, it's horrible, but that doesn't qualify you to speak on all these subjects. I can't blame them, because the libs will never let them have a normal career now. So they have to run to these people for a career. What career do they wind up having? Oh, I'll be a podcaster. I'll be a pundit.
Look, I personally like that Riley Gaines is speaking out on these issues, because I used to live with constant anxiety that you were going to invite her on our show, and now I don't have to worry about it. So it worked out great for me. I say keep going.
I did invite her on our show.
Speak your mind.
She should get back to us.
Keep it up. You're doing great. No, look, it's such an obvious deflection. It's such an obvious distraction. I thought the same thing. He gets on the wrong side of the MAGA base on their signature issue, which is immigration. So he thinks, well, what's a way to get back in the good graces of MAGA without touching the H-1B visa issue, or without in any way touching economics in general? Again, they pivot right to culture war. And what could be a more antagonistic culture war issue than this? This is literally
the oldest trick in the book.
It's the clash of civilizations.
They're coming for your
They're coming for your women. That's what Trump said.
For your women. They're coming for the white
girls.
girls.
First appeal. Exactly. That was his first appeal down the escalator. They're rapists. That's what he said.
They're rapists. Right.
Yeah. This is the ultimate culture war appeal. This is the clash of civilizations angle. And so it's very obvious that he just sort of pulled this card out of the middle of the deck to try and save some face. Yeah, that's the most obvious thing in the world.
Well, and it's incredible how many people it does work on, because the reason I found out this was even happening was all the people he influenced sharing the articles about the grooming gangs. I was like, why all of a sudden is everyone talking about this again? I saw Elon and said,
yeah, that's it.
This is his big deflector shield.
Exactly.
Come see us on tour in Los Angeles, Honolulu, Dallas, Texas, Baltimore, Atlantic City, Cohoes, New York, and Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets, and only there.